All right, here's the last portion of chapter 1, and it talks about, this portion of the chapter talks about body cavities and what we find in those, how we define them, and what their purpose is. So this would be a sagittal view, and what you're seeing are three different body cavities, actually four different body cavities, the abdominal pelvic being considered one and also two. There isn't a solid divider between the abdominal pelvic, but it's really two put together. With regard to the thoracic cavity, you have the divider between the thoracic and the abdominal pelvic, it being the diaphragm, very, very solid muscular divider between those two. In the thoracic cavity, you have the mediastinum, which you don't see on this image, but you also have the pleural cavity and the pericardial cavity. Now, cavities serve several purposes in the body. What they do is they wall off certain organs and protect them from other parts of the body. And then they also allow those organs to change in size. Think of the lungs have to expand and contract. Think of the heart, it has to expand and contract. And the cavities serve that purpose. So they serve the purpose of protecting whatever's in them and also allowing what's in them to exist in a space all their own so that they can change size. In order to do this change of size, and I wish there were a A to P image also, because in the A to P image you would see where you have the mediastinum. The mediastinum is basically where your sternum is, and you have in that area you have your trachea, your esophagus, and those are not walled off, but they are kept separate from the pleural and the pericardial cavity. So in order for this cavity to function the way I just stated that it did in terms of protecting and allowing the organ that exists in there or organs that exist in there to change size, you have to have a membrane attached to it. And that membrane needs to be double-sided. And that's what we have. In the pericardial cavity, you have a double layer, not sided, double layer membrane. We call it a serous membrane. Serous membranes have no opening to the outside world, and they have serous fluid in between them. You have a portion of the serous membrane that attaches to the organ. We call that the visceral pericardium, and then a portion that attaches to the actual cavity, the parietal pericardium. And that serves as the final protection, or the closest protection over the organ, and the fact that there's fluid in between will allow that organ to change in shape without there being any change in the shape, I guess, of the cavity itself. Not so much the abdominal cavity, but you think of the thoracic cavity, that does change its size and shape based on breathing in and breathing out. But the lungs themselves are housed in these sacs, the serous membrane sacs, and the lungs are going to change shapes within those sacs back and forth. It also, the serous membranes also allow that organ to have a relative position or a relationship with regard to the cavity. So the organ isn't right butted up against the cavity wall. You have this added protection around it, which is this serous membrane. In the medical terminology world, things are named based on the organ or the root word. And so that's why we have this pericardium, this visceral pericardium. So visceral meaning closer to the organ, peri around, cardio, heart. So visceral pericardium and parietal pericardium within the pericardial cavity. And that's what this image is explaining and your book is explaining. This is actually a transverse plane, transverse, otherwise known as the magician's sawing the woman in half, or the man in half, I guess, plane. And this is showing the same arrangement. This would be your thoracic cavity. Anterior, you're seeing that bone space, which would be the sternum. You're seeing the right and left lung. You're seeing the heart, and you're also seeing this white line, which would be representing the serous membrane that lies around each heart, or each lung, sorry, and those are the pleural cavities, and the serous membrane that lies around the heart, the pericardial cavity. So the serous membrane is in the cavity, and you have two layers, one that's closest to the cavity itself, that's the parietal layer, one that's closest to the organ itself, that's the visceral layer. And this, in this image, you have this kind of ochre color showing you the mediastinum. Mediastinum is the space in the thoracic cavity that is not the pleural or the pericardial cavity. And in it you have vital organs in it, but it basically is the space where you don't have these other organs, and that's the way we define the mediastinum. And that's the end of this one. This one is a short one, thank goodness. And what I'll do is move on to Chapter 2. Hopefully you're finding these helpful. And let me know if there's anything that I'm missing. Please listen to Chapter 2 as soon as you can. Bye now.